Looking at this photograph from the winter of 1976, you see a community defined by trust. In the Detroit suburbs of Oakland County, kids spent their afternoons sledding down hills and playing hockey on frozen ponds until the streetlights came on. Parents didn't think twice about letting them explore the neighborhoods alone. That sense of security fractured on February 15th. 12-year-old Mark Stebbins called his mother at 1:30 in the afternoon to say he was walking home from the local American Legion Hall. He never arrived. 4 days later, a businessman walking through a Southfield office parking lot spotted what he thought was a mannequin lying in the snow. As he got closer, he realized it was Mark's body. He had been suffocated. Over the next 13 months, the pattern repeated. 12-year-old Jill Robinson rode away on her bicycle after a family argument. 10-year-old Christine Milich walked from a bowling alley to a nearby 7-Eleven. 11-year-old Timothy King grabbed his skateboard and 30 cents to buy candy at a local pharmacy. Tragically, none of them made it back. Families were left staring at empty chairs at their dinner tables. Parents, like Timothy's father, Barry King, went on local television, pleading directly with the abductor to treat his son well and send him home. Instead, they found themselves burying their children. 4 children had been abducted off public streets during mundane errands, held captive and murdered. A predator was operating smoothly inside one of America's safest suburbs, and the community realized their children were no longer safe outside their own front doors. The police response scaled up immediately. 13 distinct local communities combined forces with the Michigan State Police to form a massive centralized task force. They offered a $70,000 reward and processed more than 18,000 distinct tips from the terrified public. The investigation locked on to one specific lead. A witness reported seeing Timothy King talking to a man in the pharmacy parking lot on the night he vanished. The witness described the man's vehicle, a dark blue AMC Gremlin with a distinct white racing stripe down the side. That description triggered a hyper-focused manhunt. Police began pulling over and searching practically anyone driving a blue Gremlin in the Detroit area. But the searches yielded nothing, and the panic deepened. Parents began escorting their kids everywhere. Schools locked their doors. The casual freedom of childhood in Oakland County evaporated completely. The task force found itself drowning in its own scale. Between the volume of public tips, paralyzing community panic, and a hyperfixation on the blue Gremlin, the largest murder investigation in U.S. history was generating massive amounts of noise, but entirely failing to identify a viable suspect. Then a bizarre communication surfaced. Dr. Bruce Danto, a psychiatrist consulting with the task force, received a letter from a man calling himself Alan. Alan claimed he was the captive roommate and slave of the killer, referred to as Frank. Alan offered to provide photographic evidence in exchange for immunity. He instructed Dr. Danto to signal agreement by placing a coded message in the Detroit newspaper. Weather Bureau says trees to bloom in 3 weeks. Danto placed the ad and arranged a midnight meeting at a local bar, but Alan never showed up and was never heard from again. As investigators reviewed the autopsies, they discovered the most disturbing element of the crimes. These children were not killed immediately upon abduction. Christine Milich, for instance, had been held alive for 19 days before she was murdered. And during that captivity, the killer engaged in a twisted routine of domestic care. The victims had been fed, they were bathed, their clothing was meticulously washed, their hair was groomed. This behavior was documented in stark detail by the medical examiners. The autopsy on Timothy King revealed that shortly before he was suffocated, his captor had fed him his favorite meal, Kentucky Fried Chicken. After their deaths, the killer made no effort to hide the bodies. He placed them in highly visible locations, in snowbanks, parking lots, and ditches beside busy intersections, fully clothed as if placed on display. Standard criminal profiling dictates that killers who abduct strangers quickly dispose of evidence to avoid detection. This perpetrator kept his victims alive for days, washed their clothes, fed them their favorite foods, and then deliberately placed their bodies where they would be easily found. That paradox of care and cruelty completely broke the psychological profiles investigators relied on. In December 1978, with the murders having seemingly stopped, the massive task force was abruptly dismantled. Evidence was boxed up, the dedicated phone lines were disconnected, and the operation shut down without a single arrest. The families were left to pursue the truth on their own. Timothy's father, Barry King, spent decades and thousands of dollars filing lawsuits against the state police, eventually forcing the release of more than 3,000 pages of heavily guarded investigative documents. Those documents revealed the task force had investigated a prime suspect, Christopher Busch. He was a convicted pedophile, the son of a high-ranking General Motors executive, and he had managed to avoid spending a single night in jail for his crimes. In late 1978, Busch was found dead in his bedroom from a gunshot wound to the head, ruled a suicide. The released police files showed that inside Busch's room, investigators found blood-stained ropes. Pinned to his wall was a hand-drawn sketch of a terrified, screaming child. A drawing police noted bore a striking resemblance to the first victim, Mark Stebbins. Busch wasn't operating in a vacuum. During this same period, police had uncovered a massive, multi-state child pornography and abuse ring based out of North Fox Island in Lake Michigan. The existence of that ring proved that organized networks of wealthy, connected perpetrators were actively trading material and coordinating abuse across the state. It raised the distinct possibility that the Oakland County killer was not a lone wolf, but someone protected by a much larger system. Suburban Detroit entered a state of paralysis. A massive, multi-jurisdictional task force was formed, and as police cruisers patrolled the neighborhoods, parents enforced a strict lockdown, ending the era of children roaming free. Eyewitness reports focused the manhunt on a specific vehicle, a late-model, blue AMC Gremlin. Investigators stopped thousands of these cars, processing tips at a scale that had never been seen in the county's history. Then, after the fourth victim was discovered in March 1977, the abductions stopped. The task force eventually disbanded, leaving the trail to go entirely cold, despite the thousands of interviews and physical clues collected. Thousands of leads were exhausted, yet the perpetrator remained at large. The investigation would eventually shift away from the streets and toward a shielded class of suspects, men whose wealth and high-level connections provided a barrier that the law struggled to overcome. Christopher Busch lived in affluent Bloomfield Hills, the son of a high-ranking General Motors executive. By the time of the murders, he was 26 years old and already a 4-time convicted pedophile. He never served a day in prison. Documents show his father paid a defense attorney to fly across Michigan in a private aircraft to arrange plea deals, securing probation for every single conviction. In 1977, an associate told police that Busch had murdered the first victim, Mark Stebbins. Busch was arrested, but after a brief interrogation and a polygraph exam that officials claimed he passed, he was released. In 1978, Busch was found dead in his bedroom from a gunshot wound to the head. Though ruled a suicide, the scene was gruesome. Hidden in a closet, investigators found lengths of rope that appeared to be stained with blood. Pinned to the wall above Busch was a hand-drawn picture of a terrified boy. Police noted at the time that the child in the sketch bore a striking resemblance to Mark Stebbins. The task force logged the ropes and the drawing into evidence, but they never informed the victims' families. This evidence remained buried for decades, protecting the department's reputation from the fallout of letting a prime suspect walk free. Busch was linked to an even broader network. In the 1970s, Detroit millionaire and Yale graduate Frank Sheldon purchased North Fox Island, a remote teardrop of land in Lake Michigan, 19 miles off the Michigan coast. Sheldon used a private plane to ferry children to the island under the front of Brother Paul's Children's Mission, a tax-exempt trust for troubled youth. Once isolated, the boys were subjected to filmed abuse and prostituted to wealthy subscribers. Investigation records identify Christopher Busch as a known associate and client of Sheldon's highly organized pedophile ring. When the ring was exposed in 1977, the resulting police sweep was strangely limited. Only one low-level associate, a gym teacher who helped recruit the boys, was ever sentenced to prison. Sheldon, however, received advance warning of the investigation. He destroyed his files and fled the United States, finding a permanent refuge in the Netherlands where he lived until his death in 1996. Sheldon's successful escape demonstrates the power of his network. With enough capital to relocate and enough influence to receive a tip-off, he remained entirely untouchable by the Michigan authorities. In 2012, the Oakland County prosecutor announced that new DNA testing had officially cleared Christopher Bush. Forensic experts stated that none of the biological evidence found on the victims matched the long-dead suspect. Barry King, the father of the final victim, spent decades fighting this official narrative. A retired lawyer, he used the Freedom of Information Act to force the state to turn over thousands of pages of redacted records. King's persistence eventually forced the state to release the hidden police reports from 1978. For the first time, the family saw the documentation regarding the blood-stained ropes and the sketch found at Bush's suicide scene. This map shows a different story than the state's public dismissal. Mitochondrial DNA from the victims actually matches two other suspects, James Gunnels and an associate of child molester Arch Sloan. Yet these matches have resulted in 0 arrests. Forensic science provided the state with the technical justification needed to end the inquiry. By prioritizing modern lab results over the documented irregularities of the original investigation, authorities successfully closed the door on the family's search for accountability. Barry King spent his final years in a legal war against a justice system that remained largely unresponsive to his demands for full transparency. He died in 2020. After 43 years of searching, he passed away without seeing the perpetrators named or the institutional cover-up acknowledged. The murders permanently changed the geography of childhood in Oakland County. The streets once filled with kids became empty and quiet, as hypervigilance and fear became the permanent psychological legacy of the 1970s. The true horror of the Oakland County child killer case is its survival. By outlasting the victims and their grieving families, the justice system ensured that some systemic secrets were too heavily guarded to